The Protection of Life during Pregnancy Bill 2013 makes really the very narrowest possible provision for termination of pregnancies in Ireland, and only really in extreme cases where the life of the woman is in very grave danger. And I have to say that the preservation of the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party took much more precedence in the minds of many members of the Cabinet, in my view, in drafting this legislation than the real needs of women with crisis pregnancies in this country. And it's quite clear on any reading of the bill that the government did the absolute minimum to try and say that it has now legislated for the exigencies that arose after the Supreme Court decision on the X case in 1992, and then in relation to the demands of the European Court of Human Rights following on the cases of problem and crisis pregnancies that it dealt with. I think that Section 8 of the bill, which is entitled Risk of Loss of Life from Physical Illness in Emergency, is the only section of the bill that is really clear-cut and satisfactory, and as it should be. It provides for an immediate decision by a medical practitioner when there is a grave threat that he or she believes to the life of the pregnant woman. One hopes that this will remove the so-called chilling effect that the European Court of Human Rights spoke about in relation to the fear on the part of doctors before the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act, which provides for life in jail for carrying out an abortion. They were speaking, of course, in the case taken by Ms. C, who was unable in Ireland to obtain proper information on the impact of pregnancy on her health and life as she was suffering from cancer at the time. But I believe that much more than this is needed by women in current circumstances. There should be a very clear provision here with regard to inevitable miscarriage. That is not catered for in this bill. That came very tragically to light and to the attention of the nation in the tragedy of Savita Halappanavar. And in my view, it should be catered for, it should be legislated for, and it should be provided for in this bill. Now, the situation of pregnancies involving abnormalities in the fetus, which means that it's unviable and cannot survive, is not dealt with either. That is both shameful and cowardly, I have to say, in view particularly of the harrowing testimonies that women have given who have been in the dreadful situation of finding they had to make a decision in regard to terminating pregnancies that were unviable, that wouldn't survive. Now, the Taoiseach this morning in the Dáil was trying to express understanding of women in this horrific situation, but really failed to do so. He did refer to women he knew, he says, who took a decision to carry to term, and of course that's an absolute right, and a right that should be assisted and resourced. But equally, he point blank refused to see the rights of women or couples who do not want to do this and who do not want to be subjected to the awful trauma of continuing in a horrific situation that they simply want to end. And really it is shameful as a country that women are forced out of this country, to leave this country every year to deal with this issue. The figure of abnormal fetal or fatal fetal abnormality is given as about 1,500 a year, which is substantial. And when you consider the number of women in this traumatic situation who make the decision to leave the country, the trauma, the alienation of having to leave home, leave their support base, their family and most of their loved ones, and the enormous cost as well. It's quite heartless in my view, and it should be catered for in this legislation. Now, even worse, really, in this bill, a woman who finds herself in this situation, for example, and wants to deal with the issue in Ireland and have a termination of an unviable pregnancy in Ireland, is criminalised in this bill and subject to 14 years imprisonment under Section 22 of the bill, and likewise a doctor who would assist. Now, Section 22(3) says that a prosecution for an offence under this section may be brought only by or with the consent of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And, I ask myself, what is this about? And this really is about trying to avoid a next case scenario developing where the prosecution of a woman might come out of the blue, take a government by surprise, take the whole system by surprise, as the X case did in a different circumstance. And you can imagine what would happen then. There would be consternation in society, and you would have the same opposition and horror among a majority of people that you had, for example, when the X case came to light, and a child essentially was interned in this island, ordered to be interned for a period of time to prevent her having a termination following a rape. And what the government is trying to do here is two-faced, really. It's to satisfy, on the one hand, the strong opponents of abortion by saying, look, we're criminalising this, we're taking a tough stance. And then by involving the DPP as a kind of a safety net, it's saying to people who are in favour of the right of termination, it really won't happen. It really wouldn't get by the DPP, but it could. And I and the Socialist Party will have to consider this very carefully. To vote for this kind of criminalisation would be reprehensible for us. I am of a mind to abstain on the vote at second stage on the basis that this criminalisation is removed, and there will be amendments from myself and others to remove it in the course of the committee and report stages. And if it isn't removed, then we'll have to carefully consider our attitude on the final vote in regard to this bill. I would vote for the bill, otherwise, even with the hugely restrictive nature of it. But criminalising women in this way is really barbaric and cannot be countenanced. I think just how restrictive the provisions in the bill are can be seen on reflection, particularly in the area regarding suicidal women. How many women in this traumatic situation will run the gauntlet, first of 3 medical practitioners, 2 psychiatrists and an obstetrician, and then 3 more if they have to appeal? I mean, really, it's just not going to happen. in the very majority of cases of such trauma. The stress, the trauma of it, most will opt to go abroad. There's no doubt about that. And the idea that this provision will allow what the opponents call abortion on demand, which is quite an inappropriate term to use, as if a woman walks in and looks for an abortion as if she were going into a shop. It's quite offensive. It's really farcical that such a restrictive... in fact, what will happen is women will decide to go to England. Similarly, I believe that the women pregnant by rape who want to end their pregnancy should be catered for. Rape is a horrific violation of a woman, forcing her to carry through to term a pregnancy that results is barbaric. Similarly, I believe...
4 minutes remaining.
I believe that the health of a woman is not catered for at all in this bill, and I believe that the health of a woman should be a factor and a decision on which she makes a choice. Now, thousands of women, as we know, from this state travel to Britain mainly every year to secure terminations of pregnancy. It is hypocritical. The view that it is hypocritical was criticised in an earlier contribution, but it is hypocritical because the reality is that if England or some other jurisdiction was not there, and we had the horror of backstreet abortions and women dying or being horribly mutilated as a result of backstreet abortions, this issue would have had to be dealt with much earlier. And I stand for the right of a woman to make her choice and that choice to be respected. It's my position with regard to termination of pregnancies. But, when I was a child, as we used to hear talk in rural Ireland of disdainful talk of pagan England, even as 1 million of our penniless young men and women found homes and life there. And similarly in this case, it's an English solution for an Irish problem. Cailleach in san cúpla nóma a há fáca gom bhhaile mar mar leis an bille an chosan na bethe le lín tuirchis 2030 go bhfuil an bille seo róchúng amachchas amach. Agus nach déan an bille éon slí fada go leor chun dá láil leis na cásanna crua in a bhain anna chud mná iad hénig gach blian in san tír seo mar de le tuirchis in a bhfuil dain séir don man. Agus gomórmhór I mo thuairimse an cás seo ina bhfuil fétas mí normálte nach féidir a nacht ina bheithe meas an gúil sé barbartha chur éachal mná in san cásúd dul go dtí deire téarma an tuircis. Agus be ceart go mbeadh in san bille seo cabhair agus freagra don géir céim son. Dá bhrí sin be ceart go níon faoi lasú an mille maidir leis an cás áire húd agus maidir le cásanna difriúla eile. Com eile sin measim gur ceart go mbeadh sláinte na mán chun tosaigh agus go mbeadh cinenne na mná maidir le cad a hasí an bhuatha siúd go ceart go mbeadh sé sin I tús áite I cásanna ina bhfuil tuircis atá I ngéir chéim. Com eile sin chuir mi naid go mór chuir mi naid go mór mar focail scoir gur dentar gníomh curiúil de cinenne a dhéanaan a ban, deire a chur le Turcas, in san stáit seo, agus go bhfuirt fí ceithre bliain diaag I brísún a dhearra éire agus éid dochtúr a chóiríonn le. Tá bhrí sin tá anna chuid leasathe le déanamh, déanamid iirecht iad súd a dhéanamh na céimeanna eile den mille seo agus an son cíimiid.